AWS outage outrage or just the cost of doing business? You're watching Techstrong, gang. We'll be back in a minute. Hey, folks, we're back. Everybody woke up Monday morning to another AWS outage. This one may be bigger than most, involved a DNS issue that was trying to access a particular database in an East Coast region. So there was a single point of failure. But everybody's kind of running around with their hair on fire for a couple hours in the morning. And then finally, AWS said they fixed the issue. And it took a little while for that to come all back online. But JP, let's start with you. Is this just the new norm? Is this what we're going to have to expect? And sometimes these things are bigger than we anticipated. But for all the talk on these clouds, there are single points of failure.
Well, I don't know that it was a single point of failure. It sounded more like it was a cascading effect. And it didn't just take out one entry point. It affected other entry points. It's more like a virus in many regards in how it responded, right? Being able to affect multiple services, not just itself. New norm, it depends, right? I mean, you have a choice when you leverage hyperscalers. One of your choices is that you're going to own all your own infrastructure and just leverage their hardware, much like data, or outsourcing your data set. And in that particular case, if you had done that and you had Cloudflare backup as your DNS and you had all your own database servers running in virtual machines, the likelihood that you would have gotten impacted by this would be very low. However, the money would be flowing out of your pocket faster than you would like. The reason you go to the cloud is to leverage pay-for-consumption pricing models, which means that you're now dependent on the cloud service provider delivering a certain level of availability. And I happen to know that AWS is really, really good at architecture and design of scalable, highly available clouds. Now, that doesn't mitigate the fact that occasionally there is a human error or a mechanical failure that was unaccounted for. Just you couldn't see that this, if this occurred, you would see these cascading effects. And I think that's what we're seeing. These are edge conditions. It's happening less and less. I mean, I saw reports of like, this is this is happening. It's not happening more and more. The last major outage was 2024. And yeah, we're going to hit edge conditions because we can't know everything. And equipment ages out, right? So we're learning how to run clouds, and at the same time, we're painting the bus. This is going down the road at 80 miles an hour because more and more people are coming onto that cloud. So I think what you're just seeing is, learning. You're seeing culmination of effects, and you're seeing a organization that is designed to have mean time to failure or mean time to repair at a very, very high level.
At the same time, it's interesting how these effects can cascade throughout the internet. I mean, I disagree with you. I wouldn't characterize it as a virus simply because I don't want to scare mom and pop at home. But that being said, it is interesting that so many services are dependent on this. My wife woke up this morning and found that she couldn't successfully log into Wordle. Maybe that's an AWS problem, probably. Another one I saw on Mastodon, somebody shared an account of being woken up by their cat this morning because their Wi-Fi connected cat feeder didn't feed them because AWS was down. And that sounds plausible to me. And that sounds like 2025 to me, when I could totally see a situation where people are reporting issues with electronic doorbells, cameras, logins, and, not like, oh my gosh, I can't get into the bank, but oh my gosh, I can't get into the house because everything runs through AWS. Probably the most telling was the old sysadmin joke which is none of our systems should be affected because we don't use US East 1. And one of the other sysadmins says, oh, except for that service, and then nothing works. Welcome to the world. And I just dropped something.
It was around DynamoDB, and I think a lot of back ends for applications leverage DynamoDB as a data store for the state. So your Wordle app, right? Somebody quickly, that's an app that probably doesn't have any, it's not transactional. So, hey, yeah, let's just use DynamoDB. It's quick, it's easy, it's cheap. So when you take out DynamoDB, I think you're taking out a lot of state management for a lot of apps, which is why half of it might work and half of it may not work. Because when it goes to get the state, it's like, that's when it hits the wall.
DynamoDB is an extremely popular service in AWS. It's one of the most frequently used databases, but I believe it's also used to manage their infrastructure, to your point, JP, about state, because this outage affected EC2 and S3 and some of the operations of the infrastructure. I think the analogy that works for me the best, just thinking about how you guys were kind of how to describe this, it's like cascading brownouts in the electrical grid, right? One overcapacity or something happens in one part of the grid that can actually have a whole cascading effect all the way up to larger parts of the grid. And in a sense, that's kind of what DNS is. Apparently, this was a DNS issue inside the DynamoDB service for this API endpoint. It wasn't part of their Route 53 DNS service. But DNS takes a while to propagate. And so when errors happen, they go out and they propagate. And then they have a problem and they get bigger and bigger because they're propagating. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, you're like, okay, we figure out what it is here. Push this back out. Well, that's all controlled by a time to live parameter of how long does the cache live of those DNS settings. So it is one of these rolling, both the outage and the bringing it back up takes a while, because even though they may have fixed the DNS with the servers at Amazon, there's a lot of caches out here that have the old information in it that are going to wait till that time to live expires and then refresh.
So let me ask Stephen this. There's some folks who are saying that we need to fix DNS and that some of this stuff is too antiquated to scale. And is that something we can actually do, or is this we're stuck with it because it's been around so long?
Well, it's funny. I wouldn't put it on, I wouldn't say that we need to fix DNS writ large. I do think there's a need to figure out a system to make it a little bit more resilient to situations like this. But, DNS isn't broken. Something broke in DNS. And I think that, as JP started off with, I think the thing that's most incredible and remarkable is that failures like this are not increasingly common. Failures like this are surprisingly rare. And especially when given the situation where literally anyone in the world with the technical skills can participate in DNS and push updates to DNS, that would lead us to assume that this thing would be incredibly fragile, but it's not. I think that ultimately what's going to come down here, we'll find out that the root cause of this was somebody pushing something out that they shouldn't have pushed out. And frankly, I don't think we're going to fix that.
No, and it's funny. DNS is, pretty resilient. It actually, my understanding is that the whole idea of moving from IP4 to IP6 was that issues like this would be easier to resolve. But that never occurred with global scale. We are still a world that is heavily dependent upon IP4. And until we get to IP6, we're not going to have all those nice advanced features, which is like being able to basically move your network, in seconds. Entire networks can just transform themselves dynamically through the IP infrastructure, right? We're left with old laggard ArcNet created infrastructure. It's like, we really can't do much. We've pushed it as far as we can push. DNS now has DNSSEC. You have to have, trusted, certified pushes in order to affect. So we've taken away the ability for anybody to just screw with the entire infrastructure of the internet and shut it down. But there's only so far we're going to go because IP4 has its limitations.
Mitch, I think I heard fighting words from Steven. He was blaming the DevOps people for pushing something out.
If it's not the DevOps people, it's the developers, so we know where to go to blame next. If the
Let's blame
DevOps,
the DBAs instead. Can we blame the DBAs, please?
you think about it, DNS. It's amazing that DNS works as well as it is, because it's a very cascading kind of hierarchical system about how zone transfers happen. To push updates, but it's also not in real time, meaning you can't just say, "Oh, quick, change this and push this out," and it hits all the servers, and it hits every server out there. It doesn't have sort of that emergency, oh crap setting. It's in the header of the packet, the oh crap packet, to say update this. So it's yes, it's long in the tooth, but it sure runs our network pretty well today. And yes, there's advantages in IPv6, but it shows you how hard it is to change from one generation of technology to the other. So I don't know who will get the blame for this. I'm sure someone will be held up as whoops, that was not the process that we're supposed to follow. Probably, something like that. Skipped a step, or, usually you have ways of prevent, like you said, Mike, this doesn't happen, or I guess, Stephen, this doesn't happen very often. So it isn't like we're seeing lots of DNS errors. It happens, but not very frequently.
There you go. JP, one other thought here. Is it feasible to use another cloud to back up AWS, or is that just too costly and too complicated and most people aren't going to do it?
I think some people do it for mission critical stuff. I don't think it's plausible to do for your app infrastructure. For example, we talked when I mentioned earlier, if you're running your own database, fine, you could probably run that in AWS and Azure simultaneously, and hoping that you get replication in the DNS quickly enough. 25 minutes, you could switch your globally switch your pointer from AWS to the Azure instance, but you're paying a lot for that advantage, and for a very limited subset of issues that might occur. Now, if you have SLAs that are going to be costly to you, if you are down, if you don't meet them, then it's worth it, because the fees you could be paying to your customers for being down are high and outweigh the not doing that, not building yourself. If your SLAs enable you to, live with the fact that you're down for a limited, for 99.98, let's say, okay, which is still extremely high, but let's say you had that. I forget exactly how many days a year that allows you to be down, but it's like 12 or something, right? Then take the one cloud, live with the outage. It's going to get fixed quickly, right? And deal with the issue. So it really, I think it's an economic decision for the business to want to do that. But yes, it is plausible to design your application to leverage two clouds, and with one cloud being the backup for the other cloud.
Mike, to your point of your question, I think one of the cascading effects of this will be customers reevaluating, not necessarily leaving AWS. If this was a chronic issue, they might consider changing, but reevaluating their own application architecture and infrastructure that they're using in the services. And, maybe they want to switch from a DynamoDB to a Oracle or SQL Server database that they can replicate and coordinate, have failover across different cloud services, or maybe there's things about their applications that they can shore up to make it more resilient. People will at least look at that and say, okay, this could happen again. Is there something we could do on our side, either lessen the pain?
I wouldn't bet that they're going to do that. I would bet that they're going to leave systems exactly as they are, and we'll have another outage in a year.
Oh, I'm not saying they're going to change. Everybody's going to go whole scale change things. I think that in the organizations I work in, when an incident happens, you step back and say, okay, right now, what about our part of this? Is there anything on our side we need to, are we too dependent on DynamoDB or whatever? And you may or may not decide to do anything, but it causes you, if you don't ask the question, you're at least, I think you're derelict in your duty, your responsibilities.
All right, folks, I think we've chatted about this long enough, but I would just remind everybody of one thing. They push these updates usually out sometime in the middle of the night. So if you're in IT, you're the one who's going to get the call in the middle of the night. We'll be back in a minute.
You've earned it. The spotlight, the responsibility, the weight of teams, companies, and entire industries fall on your shoulders. Lives depend on your decisions, your home life included. At work, you're protected, physically and digitally. Nothing gets through your team without a fight. But in a globally connected world, everyone sees you, including those who mean to cause you and your organization harm. And now home, your sanctuary. Attackers see an opportunity. Your digital front door is wide open. And what compromises your home can breach your boardroom. Because the devil's greatest trick isn't targeting your workplace firewall. It's convincing you that your personal life isn't at risk. Black Cloak. Digital executive protection, defending the new attack surface. Your personal life.
Hey, folks, we're going to talk now about what NetApp is up to, because the folks at Tech Field Day were at their conference last week, and there's a lot going on with NetApp in terms of not just storage, but they're managing data and expanding their ambitions. And we, of course, have a story about all that on techstrong.it. You should check that out. But Stephen, you were there. Give us the download.
Well, yeah, this is my nth NetApp Insight conference in as many years. I've been there a lot. I was actually one of NetApp's first customers, and it's been interesting to see what they've done in 3 decades of development with this platform. You may not know NetApp, but essentially they are the probably the biggest, most popular storage platform in the world at this point. Dedicated storage. Now, that doesn't mean that they're the biggest. Probably S3 is bigger. Doesn't mean that they're the biggest in enterprise tech either. Companies like Dell and HPE sell an awful lot of storage. But, NetApp is a dedicated storage company, and it's always interesting to get their angle on it because they're not part of Dell or HPE or Lenovo or whoever, because they're not part of AWS or Google, they're in a unique position because they have to play nice with others. And they always have had to play nice with others in terms of protocols and open source and partners. And that was really one of the big takeaways for me, that they are continuing to work really, really well with partners. For example, NetApp has native storage integrations in AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure, and each of those is different. It's not just that they're running their thing in all 3 clouds, it's that they made a thing that meets the needs of the customers of each of those clouds, and they're all compatible, but entirely different products with actually confusingly different names. And in many cases, they would admit that, I think. In many cases, it's interesting too, because their stuff is so integrated that, like, if you're in Azure and you want like an NFS server, you might end up being a NetApp customer without even knowing it, because it's just part of the drop-down box. So it's a really clever platform play for them. And my question going into this is, how does this extend into AI? Now, my fear was that we were going to sit there and NetApp was going to tell us, we're not a storage company, we're a data company. We understand data. We're an AI platform. Thankfully, that did not happen. And I gave everybody from the CEO on down a big pat on the back in private conversations about that, because frankly, they ain't an AI company or a data company. They're a storage company, but they're using AI in a clever way. One of the biggest challenges, as we've talked about here, is the challenge of unstructured data and multimodal data. Essentially, companies have a lot of database data, which is structured, but they also have way more data that's images and files and whatever, wherever it may be. How do they leverage that in this AI world? And that's what NetApp is using AI for. So they launched this new platform that's the AFX, that's all singing, all dancing, bells and whistles. It does the thing. But more importantly is that they have this AI data engine that runs in front of their storage. And its job isn't to run AI applications. Its job is to classify and categorize and bring structure to all that data. So essentially, they're using AI to scan and categorize and tag data, and then they present that to AI applications. And get this, one of the engineers at NetApp actually said magic words in my ears, which is there's no way to secure LLMs. The only way to keep your data from leaking is to keep your data from getting into the LLM in the first place. And I just wanted to hug him because yes, that's the only way it works. And that's essentially what NetApp's focus is. They're trying to figure out a way to basically present this data in a safe way to AI applications instead of just saying, okay, here's all the data, better not do anything bad with it because you know what's going to happen, right?
I think it's interesting because we're seeing, Stephen, the data platforms. I too was an early NetApp customer, and they have some of the best data management software, I think, of any of the platforms. But you're seeing storage companies and database companies coming into their own in the AI era because everyone's talked about, hey, how do we get to this data? But also, how do we secure it and protect it and the privacy and governance and all of that? Well, that's all built into these platforms. It's built into NetApp. Oracle had a similar announcement, a little bit different, but they had an AI data platform announcement that also categorizes data and creates vectorized information to be able to use that. But it's designed to contain the data within that environment and not into the models. And I think that's what large enterprises are going to enforce religiously is we don't want our data escaping into models. And those platforms are critical for doing that.
I'm confused, Stephen. So, do we want storage to be managed separately, or do we want storage and data management to converge in the age of AI?
Well, I think we got to be smart about it. I think that there's a role for object storage in the cloud. I think there's a role for local object storage. I think there's definitely going to be forever a need for structured data for databases, whether they're SQL or NoSQL. But I also think that there will forever be a need for unstructured data stores. And frankly, those are really hard to build. I think that one of the things that has become incredibly apparent as we've seen companies, cloud companies, as well as enterprise companies and just sort of new startups try to enter the storage space, storage is deceptively hard to do. And I think that, again, it's one of those things where it's hard enough that you have to put incredible resources into it. Another private conversation I had at NetApp that I'll share with everybody because I guess I don't respect privacy is about Google and AWS and Azure. They have put the same kind of developer resources into their storage platforms that companies like NetApp and Pure Storage and Vast have put into their platforms. In other words, AWS is as much a storage company as NetApp is, simply because they hired enough people and put enough manpower and put enough effort into developing a credible storage solution. But even they are looking and saying, you know what? We don't do it all. We don't want to do it all. We want to work with companies like NetApp and Pure and Vast and Weka and so on to integrate their storage with our thing, because ultimately, in answer to Mike's question, ultimately, we will have dedicated storage even as we're developing our own really good storage products.
All right. JP, are you buying that argument? What do you think we should do with storage in the age of the cloud? Because when I go up on the cloud, there is no storage admin. So
it's been for me, storage is, as Stephen said, it is a deceptively complex area. There was a time before I worked at EMC where I was like, dude, you hook up a disk. How hard is this? Right. It's like, and then you start to get into, all everything from like how much data can be transferred to, is the data, is it networked or is it not? And how is the data stored? How do you retrieve the data? How do you accelerate and optimize, storage of large volumes of data? And then on top of that, we have volume sizes, increasing exponentially, and people are just dumping stuff. I mean, we're up to petabytes of data just being dumped. And frankly, I would go on to say that it's now we do. I'm sorry, we have zettabytes. We have zettabytes of data, and I would say, if you took a step back and you looked at that zettabytes of data, it reminds me of the garbage hills that I used to see when I would go to Staten Island, where they dumped all the garbage. And one day they'll flatten that and build something on it. But for now, it's just a huge smelly chunk of grass, right? And so it's I don't think people cultivate that their data well. I don't think that there's a lot of organization that goes behind that. We certainly haven't done a very good job of expiring data, doing real content management about what we put out there. So stuff will say for years, and Lord only knows what's in there. We haven't done a very good job at looking what's being put out there. Could be keys, could be passwords, could be anything. So I think in that mound of zettabytes, there's a subset of data that has been protected, shielded because of its value. Its value has been identified and cultivated, and then the rest of it's all just sitting there waiting for something to occur. If the
And that's a
platform,
good use for AI, I mean, that's the thing. It's useful to use an LLM to do that task.
yes, yeah, and now is a great opportunity to just stick something on that an agent. To just your job is to go through zettabytes of data and determine what's out here, what has value, and help organize and classify it. That would help. That would be a good first step. And I don't think a human was ever going to be able to do that. So
Oh, it's entirely the amount of data. Data is like the wiring closet for your network. It looks great the day you did it and you shut the door. As soon as you shut the door, it's gone chaos, right? It automatically will start changing on its own. And data has that sort of same evolution. We have really nice models that we use to create databases. We have unstructured data, but those things also evolve because all kinds of exceptions and things happen over time. But now what we're lacking is today the semantic meaning of the data is encapsulated in the software that accesses it and does things with it. That doesn't help AI models use that data. We might have the same field or column called account in 20 different databases, but they mean something very, very different. Maybe it's formatting of the structure. Maybe it's account of what, all these kind of things. So companies are going, both SaaS companies and we have to do this with our own enterprise apps, is go back through and say, let's create the kind of data dictionary. We used to call these the semantic meaning of what is that. When we say it's the summary or it's the sum or it's the average, well, average what? And putting some definition around that so that when you are trying to use it from an LLM through into the data platform, it knows, okay, I'm asking for this information. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. I can use it.
yeah, I'm actually gonna take a second to do a gratuitous call out to myself. I wrote a book in 2005 called Enterprise Information Integration: A Pragmatic Approach, which really looked at leveraging semantics to do integration. Way too early for most people. It was ontology. Its root was building ontologies, which is like, telling frogs to build castles. And now the technology has arrived that can actually help. So I'm updating that book for the AI era and talking about how this, you can now leverage AI to drive integration through semantics. And it's a really interesting story. I agree. The roots of everything, the value that AI is bringing to this picture, is the ability to enrich all that data that's out there with additional metadata and understand it.
All right. I'm sure there's one copy in Congress somewhere that everybody has that book, but they're looking forward to the next signing. Stephen, I do have a question for you though. So I see all the database companies, to Mitch's point, suddenly are in the data management space, and I see all the storage companies are pretending to be data management companies. At some point, is there going to be like some mega mergers involving all these databases and storage companies, and we're going to see something interesting happen, and all in the name of AI?
Maybe. But I think the mega mergers will have a lot more to do with businesses and Wall Street and venture capital and all those kind of things than it will have to do with the need to integrate these things. I mean, frankly, we've already mega consolidated IT. Let me tell you, going to a tech conference in 2025 is a lot different than going to it in 2015. Remember, JP, when we were, we would go to these conferences and there would be, 80 companies all doing roughly the same thing. There ain't 80 companies in the whole industry anymore, it feels like sometimes. So I do worry a little bit about kind of where that is heading, because frankly, again, as a storage nerd, I'll tell you, storage is hard to do. Security is hard to do. Databases are hard to do. All these things are hard to do, and it's one of those interesting things that you watch companies come, you watch them announce what they're doing, and you watch them make the same mistakes that have been made so many times before in terms of availability and how to build products and how to deliver services. And you kind of wish that they could maybe learn the lessons of the past, but it seems like we humans are pretty bad at that. One last thing I'll give a plug for, though. We did live stream the Tech Field Day presentations on Techstrong TV, and we're going to be posting the video recordings. By the time you see this, they'll be posted on YouTube as well as running on the Techstrong app.
Now I haven't kept up with the details of the acquisition and where pieces have gone, but when Oracle acquired Sun, interestingly enough, they internally were working on the Oracle Cloud, which was built because they wanted to be the cloud provider to deliver bare metal opportunity as much as shared, virtual machines. But they also, when they acquired Sun, acquired storage, and now and we know that they're heavily involved in leveraging their OCI architecture, which is closer to bare metal with GPU architecture and giving some very, very high performance. And of course, they're the Oracle database company. You could envision that Oracle could be looking at creating a consolidated, entity that brings AI, storage, and the data all into one appliance at some point.
Sure. And you could think of somebody like HPE or Dell or IBM doing the same thing, right?
Right. Well, let's leave it there, guys. But it's an interesting theory, because if JP is right, then basically Sun reverse acquired Oracle, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Hey, Mike, just a quick shout out. Be sure and folks should check out Future and Signal on data intelligence platforms that Brad Shimon put together using AI. So kind of a little farther up the stack in the data management, data intelligence part of it. But it's an excellent report. You can go search for Futurum and Signal and find the page to download it.
All right. And with that, we'll be back in a minute.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
Hey folks, last week I was in Amsterdam at an event called TalosCon. It was hosted by Sidera Labs, and they were talking about something called Talos Linux, which is a distribution of Kubernetes that comes with a lightweight distribution of Linux embedded in it, and they stripped out all the stuff in Linux that has nothing to do with Kubernetes. So basically they reduce the size of the attack surface and they make the whole thing a lot more efficient. Mitch, I was really surprised when I got there because I thought this would be a small event. There was about 500 people there, and they had companies like Roche was in there and some of the biggest retailers in Europe. And it was very much a European driven event, but I think they're on to something. And I was wondering here, is this something that Red Hat and everybody else missed as an opportunity? Because, today they make you get Kubernetes and they make you get a lightweight distribution of Kubernetes and Linux, sorry, and you're supposed to figure it out. So these people were all saying, we're sick and tired of figuring it out. We just want one thing. What do you say?
Well, the options have just kind of exploded of what you can use. And some of it is caused by the alternatives to VMware kind of problem of folks that might want to consider modernizing or doing something else. But there are so many options because you just take a company like Red Hat. They created a slimmed down version of OpenShift. OpenShift's pretty complicated to set up and run, but they created a lightweight version of it. SUSE has a K3 version of Kubernetes. It's a smaller footprint, light footprint, good for the edge. You have other alternatives, in addition to KVM for virtualization. You have Linkerd for containers. You have, of course, OpenToad is an alternative to Terraform. So this whole infrastructure software layer of managing it, but also programmable or infrastructure as code, is really a big area for platform engineering teams, people that are managing the software part of the infrastructure below the application stack, kind of between the operating system and that stack. So I think a number of players are stepping into this to say, yeah, we need the heavyweight solution, but we got to have the lightweight solution or the, let's say, less friction solution to implement.
JP, does this speak to anything that you've experienced in your career, or do you think, this is just something we're kind of looking at as a momentary blip and everybody will do the same thing soon?
No, I see it moving more towards appliance, which I wondered what took so long. I for years I've wondered why people want to manage things at a YAML level manually, right? This is well, at least with AI and now you have CI/CD pipelines being built by AI. A lot of that overhead was moved to or out of the need to have a human actually build those files, but they're still being used. They still have errors in them when they're done by LLMs. They are not perfect. And so this is this is the opportunity to say that a cluster is a box. You just turn it on, plug it in, which is kind of where Kubernetes really needs to go because it's just it's too expansive to manage at a when you're doing something at scale. It just takes too much effort, too much management overhead, and it's unclear. There isn't like one way to do it. So I think this is an opinionated approach to Kubernetes, which is fine. It may not be, it may not fit all applications the same way, but it will work for a large number of organizations and reduce the overhead and labor overhead for managing a Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah. Mitch, they were also saluting GitOps, and they were alluding to the fact that they were going to put some sort of application delivery platform on top of this thing, and would be probably some type of CD capability. And I'm guessing it might be some open source thing that they're just going to implement. But is this another example of where the CD part of CI is starting to peel away from each other, and we're starting to see CI on one side for developers and CD on the other side for operators?
I think it is. And it's also just representative of the complexity of the environment. It's partly what JP was talking about. All the configuration files. And in a GitOps approach, basically everything is not only, version controlled of what the infrastructure is, but the code to build it, or the Terraform configurations to build it, or the Kubernetes configurations, all of the above. And then, yes, we automate those, with tools, Ansible and other tools today. But I think with AI, we have a much greater opportunity to not only automate, but automate the deployment of it with human control, with human intervention of that environment. And I think we're going to move away from a day of where it is stick built by humans, sort of the stick built house, and using not just automation, but more intelligent systems to help us configure, manage, and update these kinds of things. Of course, they need to stop hallucinating a little bit before we can do that too much. But that's the beauty of a GitOps approach. It's not an easy thing to shift to. It's definitely a paradigm change.
Yeah, it's interesting that there are so many different attempts to make Kubernetes more enterprise friendly, more developer friendly. You talked about SUSE and K3S. I'm a big fan of Rancher before it became, what it is now at SUSE. I still like the product. I still use the product. Docker went in that direction. OpenShift went in that direction. All of these are, I think, attempts to sort of break that boundary down and give platform engineers a consistent and uniform a platform to work with. And on the AI front, like Mitch, you were just mentioning, one of the aspects that is intriguing here is that there have been examples of proper Kubernetes, Docker, containerized, next gen web application configuration out there for long enough that most of the modern LLMs were actually trained with such a library, a corpus of knowledge about the proper way to configure this stuff. I found that LLMs are surprisingly good at platform engineering, simply in my opinion, because there's so much good examples out there of platform engineering. They're able to do it. So it's one of those rare instances where I've actually had a very good use of LLMs in sysadministration.
All right. I talked to folks about using LLMs in Kubernetes, and they said it was just too damn complicated, and that the LLMs, they could explain a few things, but they had serious doubts about using it on the operation side. But we'll see how that goes. I also want to point out.
I've used it I used it to develop and deploy on Azure, on AWS. I've had it build biceps. I've had it build cloud formations. I've had it build Terraform scripts. And for the most part, not only is it really good at getting the baseline architecture and deploying that, if you tell it that the app that was deployed isn't working, I've seen it go through and it knows how to look for problems that you typically have in a multi-tiered application between the front end and the back end, and deliver and test all of those things looking for the problem. So I don't know if that was older data, but I would Stephen agree that it is one of the things that it does really well is manage infrastructure and deployment of applications in that infrastructure.
Funny enough, that is going to be one of the major topics at KubeCon in Atlanta, and Sidera Labs is going to be there, and so are we. And we're going to have a bunch of interviews and all kinds of fun stuff going on there. So please come to Atlanta and stop by and say hello to us if you see us on the show floor, just for grins. But I want to thank our guests for sharing their knowledge and insights as usual. And of course, we'll be back again tomorrow. Now stay tuned for the rest of the Techstrong.tv lineup.